Well, yeah, you're very welcome to challenge my premise. I love that.
When most people look at Heretic, the new A24 horror thriller from writer-director duo Scott Beck and Bryan Woods, they see it as a film that is about faith. And maybe that's exactly what it is. Hugh Grant's reclusive Mr. Reed traps and intimidates two Mormon missionaries and demands they challenge their religious beliefs. It's a film that builds tension expertly, understated but striking camera work that highlights some exquisite set design choices, and an equally unobtrusive but effective score creating an ominous mood as a seemingly convivial conversation in a living room becomes a slightly more threatening TED Talk in a study, apparently morphing into a more overtly horror-themed film as they descend into the basement, before coming back to its original questions, the purpose of religion and what it means to believe, for its bloody climax. I am an absolute sucker for claustrophobic 2, or in this case largely 3-handers. Shifting power dynamics between a small cast playing out in a confined setting. And one of my favourite films of the last decade or so is 2014's Faults, with the underappreciated Leland Orser as a cult deprogrammer suffering financial hardship, who seeks to work his magic on Mary Elizabeth Winstead's cult member. A very different film that would nonetheless work well as a double feature with Heretic. So it's no surprise, at least to me, that I enjoyed this film. It is squarely in my wheelhouse. A talky, intense horror thriller with terrific performances and presentation. But as an interrogation of religion and faith, it is slightly lacking. As the YouTuber Big Joel said in a post on Blue Sky, Heretic is a bad movie, do not engage with it. The characters talk in Reddit posts to one another. I know it's tempting because Hugh Grant is in the movie, but it is not worth it. And there is a point here. This is not a particularly groundbreaking look at what it means to have faith, and the arguments that Grant makes are exactly the kind of thing you will find on many a Reddit argument on the topic. But while I'm certainly not going to criticise Big Joel, the guy is great. If you're somehow watching my dinky little videos and haven't checked out his channel, you're probably YouTubing wrong. But I think that's part of the point being made, at least in terms of Grant's character. In a follow-up post, Big Joel made another completely valid criticism. There is a scene towards the end where the protagonist is seriously injured, and in what could be her dying breaths, she tells the Reddit atheist killer about a study scientists conducted that proved prayer is ineffective. And yes, that absolutely does stretch credulity. Grant's Mr. Reed having these long speeches that sound like Reddit posts brought to life prepared is basically his whole jam. But when other characters respond in kind, that makes slightly less sense, and comes across as contrived. But that's dramatic license, and I'll let it go, especially as that part of the movie has clearly moved into more ambiguous territory anyway. Similarly, I'm going to hand-wave away that the logistics of certain twists and turns the plot takes in the final third are completely impossible, or at least unlikely, and just say there is a general feeling of this roller coaster coming off the rails as the film rattles towards its climax. Others are focused on the question of what is real in the film, seeking to explain what really happened, or offering definitive explanations to the film's events and themes. And it is certainly a film that asks you to do so, particularly in a final act that could be interpreted in many different ways. Does it play out exactly as we see and that's all there is to it? Or is it all a simulation? Or is there a point where the film departs from reality and enters the afterlife? Do we witness a miracle as Sister Barnes returns from the dead to save the day? Or some improbable but not impossible biological fluke? Or a fantasy of salvation played out in a dying mind? Is the final scene truly an escape? Or a realization of the prophet's description? Or are we in the final circle of hell? Is Sophie Thatcher's Sister Barnes reincarnated as a butterfly, as foreshadowed earlier in the film? Or is that too simply imagined? But I feel that all of these questions miss the point. The film doesn't tell us. Believe what you like. Whatever makes the most sense to you. Whatever makes the film work best for you. Whatever you feel is right. That's what it is. Ultimately, that's what faith is. And who am I to tell you you are wrong? Who is anyone? And equally, if any of those scenarios seem super unlikely, projection or overthinking the film, who is to tell you that you're wrong about that either? The possibilities are left there by its creators, deliberately crafted so that there are a number of ways to see the film. Only they truly know what they intended, and they aren't telling, likely because the ambiguity is the intent. Anyone who claims to offer a definitive explanation, no matter how sure they sound, no matter how authoritative their claims, it's bullshit. They don't truly know what was intended. They can't. And that is the point. Heretic is not a film about those questions. It is a film about those who say they have answers. Not a film about the ideas, but about discourse. It doesn't seek to offer an answer on faith or not, and allows for multiple interpretations. Like the doors that Reed invites the girls to choose between, it doesn't matter, because the outcome is the same, a different route to the same destination. This is a film about insufferable blowhards who claim they have all the answers and really just want to bend you to their will, who will brook no disagreements, only what they say is the truth, and here's why. Which is maybe a strange point for a self-styled video essayist to be making, because that is exactly the media we create. Here is the definitive explanation, the one video you need to understand film X, Y, or Z. While the truth is that art intersects with people in different ways, and this is just how we saw it. Our experiences, interests, and approaches drawing meaning in a way that is hopefully sometimes interesting and often sometimes less so. But it hit me over the head like a bag of hammers, at least partly because I've seen all these arguments before. I knew that Monopoly was previously the landlord game, and I knew it was stolen, because I'd watched the terrific essay by the brilliant Tom Nicholas on exactly that subject. I've also heard that Christ is likely an amalgam of several other religious icons, and several other arguments Grant's character makes, because they are well-worn cornerstones of rational skeptic discourse, often purposed as internet dunks on people they see as religious rubes. If the arguments Reed makes seem tired and overused instead of profound life-altering statements, that's because they are. Even these characters have heard them before and have ripostes.
One of these guys has a freaking bird head!
Heretic is a film about the obscene Redditification of discourse. Mr. Reed not just a reader, but a glorified Redditor.
Jar Jar Binks. Order! Excuse me.
He exemplifies the gamification of discourse, down to crafting a literal board with pieces he symbolically moves. We could call it the broification of discourse, dunk culture, when it's actually just the modern version of old-school macho bullshit. No longer about who can win in a fight or even have the fastest draw, but who can pound their opponent into the ground in a debate. Conversations not about challenging each other's ideas, but schooling, destroying, obliterating people we disagree with for the pleasure of those who agree with us, or sometimes for the pleasure of no one but ourselves. What is the point of Mr. Reed's scheme? Is there one? Is it just to make him feel smarter? For what audience does this play out beyond minions he already has complete control over? And what is actually the value in that? Similarly, what is the value of online rational skeptics, who invade religious spaces to tell those of faith the faults of their religion? What do they wish to happen? Do they sincerely want to change minds, or have their minds changed as they so often initially present themselves? And indeed, exactly as Grant's Reed initially presents himself, a veil of civility as he just asks questions.
How do you feel about awkward questions?
Merely a platform to provoke engagement and trap people in a conversation he has completely planned out in advance. Or is it just to feel superior? I am not someone of faith myself, but I have little interest in debating it one way or another. It doesn't change my life if someone believes in religion or not, and really tolerance only stops where intolerance begins. Which is not to say that religion and intolerance go hand in hand. They don't. I live in London. We have a practicing Muslim as mayor, and he is openly and vocally supportive not just of those of other faiths, but of the LGBT community. These caricatures we draw of religious people, often to justify hatred, are simply not always true. The film is explicit in this too, that those with faith are no different to anyone else, presenting these two young Mormon missionaries as normal young women, with typical interests, gossiping together over men and condom sizes, but subjects of mockery and othering for no reason other than their faith. Grant's Mr. Reed sees these two young women as targets for that reason too. He sees himself as superior, but he's a reclusive weirdo, a sad singleton with no friends beyond his leather-bound tomes. A control freak who whiles away his hours crafting a game board that is a perfect miniature replica of his home. A Richard Dawkins wannabe who read The God Delusion and decided to make it his whole personality. A pseudo-intellectual speechifying talking points so well worn he literally has them hanging on his wall. He lives alone in a dingy and chintzy home, his ceiling leaking so much that he collects the rainwater in a repurposed shishi-adoshi, his whole life seemingly given over to enacting this very scheme. He is the internet blowhard personified and taken to extremes, extrapolating his obsession into breaking the wills of these young women, with carefully honed speeches and philosophical homilies that aim to dizzy, not convince, logical traps and leading questions, walking them into a false dichotomy that Barnes and Paxton have to choose between, despite knowing full well that the question is unfair.
I think there's an entire spectrum that your game is neglecting.
Although again, their decision doesn't matter. These doors lead to the same place. A false dichotomy leading to a false choice. His plan mapped out to allow for his game to continue regardless of the answer. He is the personification of bad faith discourse, pretending that this game is in some way reciprocal, when he has mapped out every aspect and will only accept it ending on his terms. Much of what he says is true, although a desperate pivot to simulation theory,
Hypothesis, please. Sorry, doesn't matter.
simulation hypothesis shows that he's equally full of shit, and what he truly believes is irrelevant not just to us, but to him. His rhetoric and philosophical allusions just a gish gallop of handy arguments that merely serve as tools to achieve his goals. It is true that organized religion can often be a framework for control and oppression, as Grant's character says, but the film also shows him to be no better. In fact, the whole film is him attempting to control two young women, and that reflects a mode of discourse where the goal is to oppress and control as much, if not more, than what is being criticized. This is not a film so much about religion as behavior, as motivation. That's not to say that dialogue shouldn't take place. Ideas should be challenged, other perspectives considered, because at the least, that enables us to come away with a firmer idea of the rationale behind our beliefs. And I think the ambiguous way in which the film treats faith reflects that. It would have been easy to reverse the roles, to make this a story about a controlling religious blowhard or someone motivated by their faith to do evil, as is often seen in horror media with characters like Seven's John Doe or Night of the Hunter's Harry Powell. But I think it is telling that the bad guy is presenting arguments that many or most viewers of an A24 horror movie would agree with, and that the film eschews the horror conventions of some religious entity being a threat, with faith of some kind the key to overcoming it, instead presenting a world where the question of faith is, at most, ambiguous. For what it is worth, I don't think there is a point where the film slips into the afterlife or hell or becomes a simulation. I think what we are shown on screen is exactly what happens, with the possible exception of the butterfly in the film's closing shots likely being imagined. That the supernatural does not exist in the world of this film, but the question of whether religion is true or not in the text of the film is irrelevant to its point. A more cynical viewer than me may see the film as a grandly structured critique of organized religion, that its foundations are simply those who have greater knowledge being able to trick the impressionable into doing as they please, that Reed strips the dark secrets of religion bare and seeks to insert himself in its place. But for me, that is the arrogance that lies at the heart of his plan and not the message of the film. I think Heretic is saying that no matter who you are, no matter what you believe, what is gained from making others miserable because of your belief? Whatever is true, whoever is right, our responsibilities are to each other. The goal should be kindness to one another, and if we fail in that, then it doesn't matter how many books we have read or how flawless our arguments. We aren't superior at all. We're this guy. And is that really what you want to be?
What do you think? Yes, no, maybe?
Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate listening to this. It means you made it all the way to the end. If you saw Heretic differently to me, don't be scared to let me know in the comments. I promise I won't lock you in my cellar and play tricks on you until you see it the way I did. If you enjoyed this, like and subscribe and all that nice stuff, and maybe check out some of my other videos, and hopefully you'll like those too. Thanks for watching, and hopefully I'll see you next time.